after the release of a damning report on Pakistani grooming gangs targeting mostly British girls by the Parliament of UK. The MP who wrote the report has now fired out at the British Broadcasting Corporation or the BBC for being mum on the issue. Taking to social media, MP Rupert Lowe stated, and I quote, "There has been a complete silence from the BBC on the report. It is a truly despicable organization." Siddharth Regge is joining me from the newsroom on this. Siddharth, not the first time that we've seen BBC pushing out biased information, giving biased reportage, and this time UK MP has also pulled up the organization.
Absolutely, Kriti. Now we'll have to imagine this because there is no other way. Now, to put this into context, this report that has been obviously co-authored by Rupert Lowe says that 2.5 lakh girls from UK were abused. This is not a small number. They have been subjected to systemic abuse for over 2 decades. He's saying that it is 149 local authority areas from where these crimes have been reported, and he's specifically naming in this report the Pakistani grooming gangs that we've obviously known about previously as well. Now, while BBC might have reported about the Pakistan grooming gangs before, such a report cannot be simply ignored, and which is why I've pulled out this homepage of the BBC. This is live right now, as you can see it on your screens. And I'm just going to try and see what is it that BBC feels, is more important than this news. The explanation, we can now leave it to the editors of the organization. But again, as I said, this is about 2.5 lakh British girls who've been subjected to systemic abuse for over 2 decades. Now look at this. This is the homepage of the BBC. They're covering what's in the US-Iran agreement, which is a top global story. Again, another article that covers the US-Iran deal. They've obviously covered the drone strike, the attack that the Ukrainians did on Moscow this afternoon. Obviously, cervical cancer. You have a Star Wars story here, an Apple story here. But there is absolutely no mention of this report anywhere on their homepage. Again, the explanation as to why this is the case can only be given by the BBC editor. But here, Rupert Lowe mincing no words and taking on the BBC, calling it a truly despicable organization.
Yes, absolutely glaring indeed, Siddhartha. In fact, I also want to go across to the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, Professor Madhav Nalapat, who's joining us now. Professor Nalapat, thank you very much for joining us. We were just discussing how time and again BBC have gotten into a habit of sorts of pushing out only biased reportage, and again in this case of Pakistani grooming gangs, no such report has been published on the BBC website at a time when its own MP, the UK MP, has exposed the Pakistani grooming gangs by the way of the report that is now public, which says 2.5 lakh British girls may have been targeted and at least 1,400 cases have already come forward. What do you make of how BBC is deciding what needs to be covered and put across for the media and for the general public?
Well, I think the editors are nervous that these grooming gangs will come after them and come to broadcast house or something. This is a very cowardly thing that they are doing in not covering it. The fact is these poor innocent British girls are tricked and tracked by all kinds of false promises, and then they are left in the lurch, and many of them then become dependent on drugs. They become depressed. So many horrible things happen to them after this terrible incident in which they are successfully groomed, exploited, passed from hand to hand, and then thrown away like rubbish. So the BBC should recognize it's an important sociological problem. They shouldn't, put a religious color to it for a simple reason that these grooming gangs don't represent 99.99% of Muslims. They represent a tiny fraction only. And for that reason, don't put a communal color to it, because what the BBC is doing is implying that all Muslims are doing this kind of thing, which is absolute nonsense. As I said, it's about 1% who are doing it or who could be doing it. 99.9%, so 0.1%, that's about it. So the BBC is doing a libel against the Muslim community also. It is not fulfilling its purpose. It is being kept alive by taxpayer money, and the taxpayers are not getting their value because they're not getting good news from the BBC.
Yeah.
They're just getting stories which the BBC editors feel should pass. And they have not, the British Broadcasting Company at one time was a very proud institution. Today, I'm sorry to say, it's fallen to disgrace. And as a consequence, those who are watching it are dwindling and dwindling in number, and those who believe it are even less in number. Thank you.
Right, Professor Nalapad, allow me to take another question from you. Do you think there's also complicity of some of the local organizations, the NHS, the police, the agencies that are involved, and possibly also media organizations? Because how is it that 250,000 girls were exploited without all of these agencies getting to know anything about it?
Look, the fact of the matter is, I talked about algo warriors a long time back. And these are people who basically make algorithms. And they used to make algorithms such that in a search engine, you will come across, for example, a lot of stuff about, Christians going after some groups, Hindus going after some groups, Jewish people going after some groups, but never the radicals like the Wahhabis or the Khomeinists. So the problem is that it's a deep-rooted problem. You're absolutely right. But I think this MP has done a very, very significant thing, and I hope more MPs will raise his or her voice, because this is a question of protection of young girls, it's a question of protection of minors, and nothing can be more said. Look at the huge controversy correctly done about Epstein. This is Epstein, another case of Epstein, except that the numbers are much bigger in scale than Epstein's numbers were. And yet what happens? A lot of coverage of Epstein, no coverage of this. The double standard is so appalling, I can't find words to describe it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nalapad, for joining us and for giving us your perspective on this. And it's time for a very quick commercial break, but stay tuned.